It had been raining for 3 days straight, the kind of Oregon rain that feels like a confession, steady, relentless, as if the sky is trying to wash something away. And maybe it was. Maybe it was trying to wash me clean, too. 10 years. 10 years since the accident. 10 years since the call that split my life into before and after. My husband, Thomas, had died on a fog-slick highway one October night. His car spun out and struck a guardrail. Instant, they said. A mercy. People brought casseroles. My daughter, Emma, was 12. Too young to understand, too old to believe my trembling reassurances. The house went quiet after the funeral. The world did too. And yet, one thing remained untouched, the garage. Even during our marriage, that space was off limits. His sanctuary, he called it. He'd lock it religiously, keep the keys in a small drawer by his bedside, and any time I even suggested helping him clean it, he'd snap. "You don't need to see what's in there, Anne." He'd say it like a joke, but his eyes would flash in that way that made me step back. For 10 years after his death, I honored that invisible line. Part out of habit, part out of fear, and part because. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. But life changes quietly, like tide creeping up a beach. Emma grew up, graduated, moved to New York. The house, once full of laughter and piano lessons and burnt toast, began to feel too big, too heavy. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a memory that refused to fade. So when my realtor suggested selling, I agreed. A smaller place, fewer ghosts, just me, a cat I didn't even like, and whatever pieces of my life I could fit into boxes. Only, there was one place left unboxed, the garage. That morning, I stood in the hallway staring at the key. It was small, brass, slightly tarnished. The tag read simply, "Garage," in Thomas's neat handwriting. It was strange, after a decade, to see his letters again, perfect, measured, emotionless. The same way he spoke when he was angry. Rain whispered against the windows. I slipped the key into my pocket, grabbed a flashlight, and told myself it was time. The garage door groaned when I turned the lock. The smell hit first. Dust, oil, something faintly metallic. Then came the stillness. The kind of stillness that feels watched. And then, when the light cut through the dark, I froze. At first I thought it was wallpaper. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pinned, taped, arranged in chaotic clusters, but not of me. Her, the same woman, different hair colors, outfits, cities, smiling on a park bench, laughing in front of a Christmas tree, holding a child, a boy, with Thomas beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The photos weren't random, they were a timeline, a second life, unfolding year by year. I stumbled forward, my flashlight trembling, and that's when I saw the jewelry box. A small red velvet case sitting neatly on the workbench. Inside, a necklace. Diamond and pearl, my grandmother's necklace, the one that vanished 12 years ago. Thomas had sworn I must have misplaced it. I'd cried over that necklace. It was the only heirloom I had left of my mother. My knees gave out, and I caught the edge of the bench to steady myself. Inside the drawers were more letters, photos, receipts, a paper trail of betrayal, plane tickets to Vancouver, hotel bills, a second insurance policy. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor surrounded by papers, letters, and ghosts. My husband hadn't just cheated. He'd built a second life, a second wife, 2 children, a whole suburban existence across the border. And then I found the final piece, a document from the insurance company, a policy increase, 2 months before his death, and my signature, forged, shaky, wrong. He was preparing to leave me with nothing. My stomach turned. He'd planned everything. Even in death, he had left me in his shadow, but not anymore. The next morning, I called a private investigator. He was an older man named Callahan, the kind with a worn leather briefcase and a voice that had seen too much truth. When I showed him the documents, he didn't even blink. "This isn't just infidelity," he said. "It's fraud, possibly bigamy. You ready to dig?" I nodded. He smiled faintly. "Then let's start digging." 3 weeks later, Callahan called. "Found her," he said. "Her name's Margaret Hayes, lives in Vancouver, 2 kids. Been widowed 10 years, too. Guess who her husband was?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. When he sent me photos of her, the same woman from the garage, I felt something strange. Not anger, not jealousy, pity. Because I realized she didn't know either. A week later, I drove to Vancouver. When she opened the door, Margaret looked like a mirror version of me. Tired eyes, polite smile, the kind of grace you learn only from surviving heartbreak. "I think we need to talk," I said. And when she saw the photo, her and Thomas at the lake, she went pale. For the next 3 hours, we pieced together the puzzle of our lives. His lies fit together with eerie precision. Weekend business trips, unexpected emergencies, different birthdays celebrated on alternating weeks. We'd both been widows. We'd both been wives. By the time I left her house, the air between us wasn't bitterness. It was solidarity, a quiet, shared rage. That night, I opened a new file on my computer and titled it The Widow's Garage. It started as notes, fragments of memories, copies of receipts, scanned photos. But soon, it became a story, not just of what he'd done, but of what I'd survived. The insurance company reopened the case after I sent evidence of the forged signatures. The payout, $5 million, was revoked from Margaret's estate. Half of it returned to me, legally. But I gave her a quarter, because she too had been deceived. Because none of this was her fault. And then, for the first time in 10 years, I slept. Months passed. The book was published, and to my shock, it went viral. The Widow's Garage became more than a memoir. It became a movement. Women writing to me about their own locked doors, their own secrets they were too afraid to open. When the royalty checks came, I didn't cry. I booked a flight to Paris. I sold the house, left the keys, including the one marked garage, on the counter. And as the taxi drove away, I whispered to the rain, "You don't need to see what's in there." Then I smiled, because now I had seen it all. Now I live in Paris. And sometimes, when I sip champagne by the window overlooking the Seine, I think about him, about the man who built his lies like cathedrals. He forbade me from his garage. Now his secrets pay for my freedom. And every time I toast, it isn't to him. It's to every woman who ever felt like a guest in her own life until she found the key. I didn't realize how heavy silence could be until the truth filled it. For weeks after I found the garage, I lived in a fog of mechanical movements. Make coffee, sort papers, breathe, don't think. But the mind has a way of replaying things when you're trying not to look. Every memory I'd buried started rising from the dark like oil through water. I began to see things I'd missed, little details that now glowed with meaning. The time he came home smelling faintly of lilacs, claiming a coworker hugged him goodbye after retirement. The receipts I found for gas stations miles away from any client's office. The way he'd flinched when I mentioned moving his things from the garage to make space for Emma's bike. At the time, I thought I was being paranoid. He'd made sure of it. "You imagine things when you're lonely, Anne," he'd said once, eyes soft, voice patient, the kind of tone that makes you question your own sanity. It was subtle, masterful even. The kind of manipulation that doesn't scream, it whispers. It convinces you you're the problem. I remember one night, maybe 8 years ago, when Emma had the flu. He'd been away for a client dinner. I stayed up all night cooling her forehead with a damp cloth, counting her breathing like a prayer. When he came home at dawn, rumpled and smelling faintly of perfume, I was too tired to question him. He crawled into bed beside me, brushed my hair back, and whispered, "You're the strongest woman I know." And I believed him. Grief plays strange tricks on memory. When he died, I didn't hate him. I missed him. That's what makes betrayal cruelest. It doesn't just take your trust. It rewrites your past. Every loving word becomes evidence. Every memory turns suspect. By the third week, I'd stopped crying. Crying was too soft, too passive. So I did what he never imagined I could do. I investigated. Callahan, the private investigator, was meticulous. He dug through bank records, travel logs, property deeds. 3 weeks in, he handed me a folder. Inside, photos, addresses, phone numbers. "He used your inheritance," he said, tapping the page, "to buy her a house in Vancouver." I blinked. "My inheritance?" "From your mother. The account was joint. He transferred it in increments, small enough to go unnoticed." I sat in silence, staring at the neat columns of transactions. Each line a betrayal disguised as routine, each withdrawal a secret built brick by brick. "He was planning something bigger," Callahan added. "These forged documents suggest a total financial separation. Divorce, most likely. You'd have been left with debts. He'd have had the assets." I laughed then. Not the light kind, the kind that sounds like something breaking. "He wanted to erase me," I said. Callahan looked at me and failed. That night, I went back into the garage. I don't know why. Maybe to feel it one more time. The walls were still covered with her, Margaret Hayes. Her smile, frozen in 100 variations of happiness. I stood in front of one photo, a beach shot. He was holding her hand, wind tugging at her hair. He looked alive. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. Not just the affair, the fact that he'd saved his joy for someone else. I reached out and tore one photo down, then another. But halfway through, I stopped. The wall, half empty, looked worse somehow. So I put the photos back. They were evidence now, not ghosts. Margaret Hayes lived in a blue house with a white porch, 2 streets away from a park. When I drove up, I half expected her to slam the door in my face. Instead, she opened it slowly, her expression wary but kind. She looked younger than me, or maybe just less tired. Her hair was the same dark shade mine used to be before the years bleached it out. "Yes?" she asked. I took a breath. "My name is Anne Clark. I think we need to talk about Thomas." Her hand trembled just slightly on the doorknob. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." Her house was filled with the faint scent of coffee and lemon polish, lived in, warm. Family photos lined the hallway. Thomas smiled in all of them, sometimes with her arm around him, sometimes holding 2 children, a girl about 12, a boy maybe 10. Seeing him there felt like falling through time. The same half smile, the same hands. He looked like a man I'd buried, only younger, more vibrant, as if he'd shed the life we built and found one that fit him better. We sat at her kitchen table. Neither of us spoke at first. Then I slid a photo across, the one from his garage, her at the lake. She stared at it for a long time. "I took that," she whispered finally. 10 years ago." Her voice cracked. "He said he didn't like photos." I nodded. "He didn't, with me." Something in her face changed then. Realization, grief, then fury. She stood abruptly, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she said. You were—" "Yes," I said quietly. "His wife." She sank into the chair. For a long time, the only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. Finally, she looked up. "He told me his first wife died, in a car accident." I almost laughed, that same cold sound again. I suppose in a way she did. We spent hours piecing our lives together. Our calendars aligned like puzzle pieces. His work trips were her romantic getaways. His late meetings were dinners, birthdays, anniversaries, with them. At one point, she whispered, "How did he do it? How did he live like this?" I stared at my tea. Because he thought we wouldn't look. When I left her house, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pine and cold metal. Margaret walked me to my car. She looked broken but fierce, like a woman who had lost everything and realized it might be a blessing. "What will you do?" she asked. "Make it right," I said, "for both of us." She hesitated. "If you need anything, call me." I smiled faintly. "I will. Thank you." But I knew what I had to do. I wasn't calling for help. I was calling the insurance company. That night, I sat down at my computer and began typing. "To whom it may concern, I am writing regarding the life insurance policy of Thomas Clark. I believe there has been a forgery and an illegal claim." By the time I hit send, the rain had started again. Only this time it sounded different. Not like confession, like applause. You never forget the sound of your own anger. Mine wasn't loud. It was quiet, sharp, deliberate, like a blade being sharpened in the dark. The insurance company called 2 days later. The man on the other end had a polite, practiced voice, the kind used to deliver bad news. "Mrs. Clark, we reviewed your claim. You were indeed removed from your late husband's policy without verified consent. We'll need to open an internal investigation." I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. Good. That was the tone of progress. As we spoke, I glanced again at the folder Callahan had given me. The documents, the signatures, the letters, all of it told a story. Not of love, not even of betrayal, but of strategy. Thomas had planned everything meticulously. He hadn't just wanted to leave me. He wanted to erase me financially, to make me small enough to forget. But he'd underestimated one thing. The dead don't get the last word. The living do. That afternoon, I drove to the attorney's office that handled his estate 10 years ago. The receptionist hesitated when I gave my name. When I said, "It's about Thomas Clark," her expression shifted, recognition mixed with discomfort. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Peters, looked uneasy when I walked in. "Mrs. Clark, I wasn't expecting—" "No one ever does," I said. He adjusted his glasses. "I assume this is about the closed estate?" "It's about reopening it." He frowned. "That's complicated." "So was my marriage," I replied, "but I managed that for 20 years. I dropped the forged signature on his desk. He stared at it for a long time. "I can have our forensics team review this," he said finally. "Do that," I said. "And while you're at it, check who notarized it, because if it's the name I think it is, I have another call to make, to the police." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of fear. Not of me, but of what he was starting to realize. When I left the office, I felt it. The first real surge of control in years. Not triumph, not yet, but power. Quiet, simmering, earned. On the drive home, the rain returned. Oregon rain, soft but relentless. The kind that blurs everything into grayscale. I thought of Margaret then, the way she'd hugged her children, the confusion in her eyes. She hadn't been my enemy. She'd been my mirror. He'd lied to both of us, but we were the ones left standing, and I was just getting started. The insurance company investigation opened every locked door I hadn't been able to touch. Within a month, the second family, Margaret and her children, were legally named as co-beneficiaries of the fraudulent policy. It should have been messy. But something strange happened. Margaret reached out to me first. She invited me for coffee at a small cafe by the river. I almost didn't go. But curiosity is stronger than bitterness. She looked tired but calmer this time. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "We've decided to cooperate with your claim. I'm not fighting you." I blinked. "You'd have every reason to." She shook her head. "He lied to me too. The money never felt like mine. It felt tainted." I studied her face. the honesty in her expression. Maybe for the first time I saw her not as her, the woman in the photos, but as another survivor. She sipped her coffee, then added, "You're not the only one he forged. He signed my name too. Bank forms, school papers. He was building an empire out of lies." I exhaled slowly. The anger I'd been carrying softened a little. Not gone, just tempered. She wasn't my enemy. She was evidence of the same wound. "Do you ever feel like we were ghosts in the same house?" I asked quietly. She smiled, sad and knowing. "Yes, just on different floors." By spring, the investigation concluded. Forgery confirmed. Misappropriation of funds proven. The insurance company issued a reversal. 5 million, transferred into my account. But money wasn't the victory. It was validation. Proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The world had finally said, "You were wronged." I didn't celebrate. I sat on the floor of the empty garage, the check still unopened beside me. I wanted to feel what closure was supposed to feel like, but closure doesn't arrive like lightning. It creeps in like dawn, slow, uncertain, fragile. I looked around at the walls, now stripped bare, no photos, no ghosts, just me. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The idea for the book came one night, months later. I woke up at 3 a.m. with a sentence in my head. He forbade me from the garage, and that's where I found my freedom. I turned on the lamp, grabbed my old laptop, and started typing. At first, it wasn't a book. It was therapy, a purge, a confession. But the words wouldn't stop coming. They poured out like the rain that night I first opened the door. I wrote for months. About the silence, the manipulation, the lies, the years I spent being small, about Margaret, the children, the investigation, about what it means to love someone who wears a mask so long they forget who they are underneath. When I finally sent the manuscript to a publisher, I didn't expect an answer. 2 weeks later, they called. They wanted it. All of it. They called it The Widow's Garage. The book came out on a Wednesday. By Friday, it was on the front page of every true crime blog in the country. By Monday, a reporter called it a masterpiece of survival. I didn't care about the praise. What mattered was that my story, our story, was finally out there. The world knew who Thomas Clark really was, and I didn't have to whisper anymore. 6 months later, I moved to Paris. It wasn't about running. It was about space, breathing room, new air. I rented a small apartment with ivy crawling up the walls and a view of the Seine. Every morning, I drank coffee by the window, watching the city wake up. Sometimes letters arrived, women from everywhere, widows, divorcees, survivors of lies just like mine. They thanked me, told me my story gave them courage to open their own garages. One letter came from Margaret. No bitterness, no blame, just 5 words. He fooled us both. But we won. I read it twice, smiled, and poured myself another glass of champagne. Because she was right. We did win. Not because we destroyed him, but because we found ourselves in the ruins he left behind. And as I watched the city lights ripple across the river, I whispered the final truth. Some secrets bury themselves. Others build you. Paris, a year later. The city hums like a heartbeat, and I move through it as if I've always belonged here. My mornings start with black coffee and the sound of church bells echoing over the river. The memoir has gone global, translated, quoted, dissected. But the part that matters most isn't in any interview or headline. It's what happened 3 months ago. I went back to Oregon, back to the old house, sold now, repainted, reborn. The new owners let me visit for 10 quiet minutes. The garage was empty, clean, bright, no photographs, no secrets. I stood where his workbench once was, where the jewelry box sat, where I'd found my past life shattered and waiting, and I placed one thing there, a small silver key, the same one that opened the door 10 years too late. Then I whispered, "You don't own this space anymore," and walked out without looking back, because healing isn't about forgetting, it's about reclaiming. Now every time I hear the soft click of a closing door, I smile, because not all locks are meant to keep people out. Some are meant to remind you that you can open them whenever you choose.